Story 1. Noises in the attic, but there is no attic. Daniel had lived in the small ranch-style house for 3 years. It was his sanctuary, quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and the steady hum of normal life. He liked routine. Every morning, he brewed coffee, read the news, and went about his day. But recently, something was changing. The first night he heard it, he was lying awake, staring at the cracked paint on the ceiling. A faint, scratching noise, soft, irregular, like a mouse nervously tapping its claws. He told himself it was nothing, maybe a branch brushing the roof. But the next night, the sound returned, louder this time, like heavy dragging, scraping slowly from one side of the ceiling to the other. Daniel sat up, heart racing, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if willing it to stop. He pressed his ear to the pillow and swore the sound was moving, creeping closer. It wasn't outside, it wasn't in the walls, it was right above him. Daniel's mind raced with explanations. Squirrels, rats, wind, but his house didn't have an attic, only a crawl space, barely big enough to fit a hand. He even shone a flashlight up through the tiny vent, nothing but dust and spider webs. Every night after, the ritual continued. The dragging sound became a sickening lullaby, slow and deliberate, sometimes stopping as if listening for his reaction. Sometimes it would pause, then begin again closer to his side of the bed. He tried to ignore it, but sleep became impossible. Nights stretched on endlessly. The silence before the sound started felt heavier each time, like the calm before a storm. On the 5th night, desperation won. Daniel dragged his ladder out from the garage, propped it against the house, and climbed onto the roof, beneath a sky heavy with stars. The shingles were cold and rough beneath his palms, the street eerily empty. He shone his flashlight across the roof, no signs of animals, no movement. But then the dragging began again, slow dragging. Right beneath his feet, he knelt down, the hair on his neck prickling, and pressed his palm flat against the shingles. The sound stopped. He waited, breath visible in the cold night air. Then it started again, from below the roof, from inside the ceiling. Days passed. Daniel tore through the house looking for hidden spaces, vents or cracks, anything that might explain the sounds. But the crawl space was empty, the ceiling solid. His friends told him to move out, to get help, to see a doctor. But he refused. Sleep-deprived and paranoid, Daniel began speaking to the ceiling, begging the unseen presence to stop. Sometimes, at the peak of his exhaustion, he swore the dragging would pause, as if the noise was listening, thinking, and sometimes the sound changed. Instead of dragging, it would knock 3 times, slow and deliberate, almost like a message. One night, he finally climbed back onto the roof at 2 a.m., flashlight in hand, hoping to confront whatever was causing the noise. Standing on the shingles, the street silent below, he heard it again, dragging, slow and steady, and then, suddenly, the noise shifted. It was no longer beneath his feet, it was behind him. Daniel spun around. The empty night sky stared back. At that moment, he climbed off the roof and ran inside to hide in his bed. To this day, he avoids looking at the ceiling when he lies in bed, because every so often, in the dead quiet, he swears he hears that slow dragging begin again. Story 2. 3 knocks at midnight. Ava had always been a light sleeper, the kind of person who hears the slightest creak or whisper and immediately sits bolt upright in bed. Her apartment was small and quiet, nestled on a peaceful street where the only usual noises were distant cars and the occasional bark of a dog. At first, the knocks started softly, 3 heavy, deliberate raps at her front door exactly at midnight. The first time, she jolted awake, heart pounding. The clock on the bedside table blinked 12 a.m. in cold red numbers. She told herself it was just someone making a prank call, or maybe a lost neighbor needing help. She opened the door quickly, only to be greeted by empty porch steps and a silent street. No one there. The next night, same time, same 3 knocks. Ava looked through the peephole. Nothing but darkness. Her palms were sweaty as she backed away. She locked the door twice and kept the curtains drawn tight. Night after night, the knocking continued, unchanging, unrelenting. 3 sharp raps, slow and deliberate. No one ever waited for her to answer. No footsteps, no voices, no shadow at the window. Her friends told her to call the police, but Ava refused. What would they say? Someone knocking on an empty doorstep. It had to be some kind of prank or wiring glitch, maybe a tree branch hitting the door. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. One night, she stayed awake, sitting on the couch clutching her phone. The clock ticked down toward midnight like a slow heartbeat. At exactly 12 o'clock, the knocks came again, but this time, they weren't at the door. They came from the hallway closet. Ava froze, every muscle tight. The closet door was shut, but now faint light leaked from beneath the crack. The knocking continued, softer, almost impatient. She reached for the doorknob with trembling fingers, hesitating. The knocking changed. A slow scrape, like nails dragging down wood. A cold breath of air seemed to hiss out from under the door. Ava's skin crawled. She took a step back as the door creaked open just an inch. The closet was empty, filled only with hanging coats and shoes. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved from the closet to the walls, tapping and rapping, echoing in the corners of the apartment, as if searching. Ava grabbed her phone and started recording the sounds, the knocks growing louder and faster until they abruptly stopped. Silence. The next morning, she played back the recording. The knocks were there, unmistakable and steady, but faint beneath them. Something else, a whispered voice. She couldn't make out the words, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Days passed. Ava stopped sleeping in her bedroom, taking refuge on the couch. The knocking never returned at the door, but it haunted the closet and walls, sometimes a soft scratching, sometimes rhythmic pounding. Her fear grew into obsession. She covered the closet door with duct tape, placed cameras, and tried to stay calm, but every night the knocking found a new place to appear. One night, as she sat frozen in the dark living room, the closet door slowly swung open by itself. A chill swept over her as the knocking began again, this time from inside the walls. After surviving another miserable night, she decided to move and vowed never to return. It's been 1 year now, and life has moved on. But even now, she freezes at the sound of knocking, terrified that one night the knocks will come back and start the insanity all over again. Story 3. The whistle in the walls. Eli had never been bothered by the little noises a house makes, the creaks, the settling of wood, the hum of the heater kicking on. But one evening, while reading in bed, he noticed something different. A faint, soft whistle, almost like someone softly blowing a cheerful tune through pursed lips. At first, he thought it was the wind. He listened closely. The whistle moved with him. When he sat in the kitchen, it was near the fridge. He stood in the living room. It came from behind the couch. Upstairs, the sound seemed to follow him, always near a wall or corner, never far. It wasn't loud, barely more than a breath, but it was persistent, cheerful, almost playful, like a forgotten lullaby drifting through the house. After a few days, Eli's curiosity turned to unease. He pressed his ear against the walls, trying to locate the source. The whistle grew louder, clearer, then suddenly stopped. That night, Eli woke to find the sound directly behind his headboard. The melody was slower now, drawn out like a slow breath, almost like the house itself was breathing with him. His eyes darted around the dark room. The whistle faded, replaced by a faint rustling sound coming from the walls. Eli tried to ignore it, but the next day he started talking to the house, asking what it wanted, if it was real. Sometimes he thought he heard the whistle answering him, faint, distant, playful. Days went by, and the whistle's tune changed subtly, sometimes happier, sometimes sadder, almost like it was telling a story. One night, as Eli lay in bed, the whistle stopped completely. A voice whispered the final note, soft, breathy, so close it felt like it was right next to his ear. Eli flipped on the light. The room was empty. He pressed his hand to the wall where the sound came from. It felt faintly warm, like someone had just been leaning there. He crawled back into bed and prayed for sleep to come quickly. After that night, the sound never returned. Maybe it has moved on, or maybe it's just waiting to return. Sometimes when the house settles at night, he thinks he hears the first few notes of that tune and wonders if it's waiting for him to finish it. Story 4: The Radio That Turns Itself On. Mark had always been fascinated by old technology, relics from a bygone era with secrets etched into their scratched surfaces. So when he spotted an antique battery-powered radio at a weekend yard sale, he didn't hesitate. It looked like something his grandfather might have used decades ago. The radio was battered and grimy, the dials were stiff, the casing faded, and the once gleaming metal was tarnished. Mark wiped away layers of dust and grime, curious if it still worked, but no matter what he tried, the radio remained silent. The batteries were long dead. He set it on a shelf in his living room, a dusty decoration among the books and vintage knickknacks. It was easy to forget, until the night it came alive. It was exactly 2:47 a.m. when the radio crackled suddenly. Mark woke with a start to static and a low, broken voice speaking in an unintelligible language. The sounds twisted and warped like whispers carried across a vast void, distant yet impossibly close. He reached for the radio to switch it off, but the static only grew louder. The voice was fragmented, erratic, not quite human. Mark unplugged the radio and the noise stopped. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe a power surge, radio interference, or a trick of his sleep-deprived mind. But the next night, as the clock struck 2:47, again, the radio burst to life once more, louder, more insistent. The voice crackled through every speaker in the house. The kitchen radio, his phone's Bluetooth speaker, even the old stereo in the garage. Mark's rational mind began to unravel. No matter how many times he unplugged or destroyed the devices, the static would return at the same exact time. He smashed the radio with a hammer, shards scattering across the floor. Relief washed over him. But when 2:47 came again, the static returned, louder than ever, now emanating from the walls themselves, filling every corner of the house. Mark sat frozen, heart pounding, as the voice spoke clearly through the static. "I can see you." The words echoed through the rooms, chilling and direct. Desperate, Mark recorded the eerie broadcast, hoping to understand it or capture proof. But when he played it back, his own voice repeated the phrase, distorted and warped, and behind his voice, another unfamiliar voice spoke rapidly, as if answering him in an unknown tongue. The recording cut to static. Each night, the voice seemed closer, the static stronger. Mark's sleep vanished, replaced by growing terror. The house felt alive, watching, listening. His friends urged him to seek help, but Mark was trapped in a waking nightmare, haunted by the radio's message and the unknowable presence it hinted at. Eventually, he sealed the radio and all related devices inside a locked box and tossed it into the river. As he watched it float out of sight, he felt a slight hint of relief in his soul. He since swore off old electronics, fearing the cursed voice would find him again. Still, on certain nights, just before 2:47, Mark hears a faint humming, a ghostly echo of the radio vibrating through the walls, reminding him that some things are never truly gone. Story 5. The Static Call. Claire's phone rang exactly at 1:13 a.m. The screen flashed, "Unknown caller." She hesitated before answering, expecting some prank or telemarketer, but all she heard was static, thick crackling noise that filled her ear, drowning out everything else. She hung up, telling herself it was just a glitch, but the call came again the next night. Same time, same unknown number, same unrelenting static. She tried blocking the number, but it kept getting through. Days passed. Each night at 1:13 a.m., her phone rang. The static grew louder, denser, almost drowning out her own breathing. Claire's nerves frayed. She stopped sleeping well, her days a haze of exhaustion and anxiety. One night, desperate for answers, Claire held the phone to her ear and focused on the static, straining to hear any pattern. And then, amid the crackle, she caught a faint whisper. It was a voice, distant, distorted, but unmistakable. It called her name. Her heart pounded. She dropped the phone in shock. Claire tried telling herself it was her imagination, exhaustion playing tricks on her, but when the calls kept coming, she grew afraid. She recorded the static one night, hoping to catch something concrete. On playback, the whispering voice was clearer, calling her name softly, almost pleading. Then, in a voice eerily like her own, it whispered, "Turn around." She froze, cold sweat running down her back. The next night, she set up a camera and left the phone by her bedside. At exactly 1:13 a.m., the phone rang again. She watched the screen flicker but saw no one. Suddenly, the camera caught a shadow moving behind her. Claire turned sharply. Nothing was there. The shadow flickered again in the corner of the room, darker than any normal shadow should be. She began to dread bedtime, fearing what might happen if she ignored the call or answered again. As nights went on, Claire's sense of reality frayed. The static whispered more than her name, snippets of sentences, fragments of memories she didn't recognize. The voice sounded closer, almost inside her head. She confided in a friend who suggested it might be a stalker or prank caller, but when Claire tried calling the number back, there was only silence. One night, Claire woke to her phone ringing. The number was unknown, but this time, the static was replaced by a chilling voice. It said in a low, breathy tone, "Don't look behind you." Terrified, Claire didn't dare move. The call ended. The final night came when Claire awoke suddenly as the phone rang again. She answered only to her own voice, whispering through the phone, "Turn around." She obeyed. There was nothing there but her reflection in the mirror, holding her phone. The phone steadily repeating the words again and again. Was this real? Was this all in her head? She may never know. Claire no longer answers unknown numbers, but admits she still dreams of that voice telling her to turn around, and wakes up afraid she might obey again, but this time with graver consequences. Story 6. The Footsteps in the Driveway. Henry's bedroom window overlooked the gravel driveway that led to his front door. On quiet nights, when the world outside was still and the only light came from the pale moon, he could hear the smallest sounds, in the crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant rustle of leaves, the occasional owl's call. It was a peaceful neighborhood, the kind where neighbors waved from their porches and children played until dusk. Henry liked it that way, safe, familiar, but then the footsteps began. The first time he heard them, it was late, well past midnight, heavy, slow, deliberate steps crunching across the gravel. They started at the edge of the road and made their way toward his house. Henry's heart jumped. He froze, listening as the footsteps moved closer, stopping just beneath his bedroom window. He peeked through the curtains, but saw nothing. No figure, no shadow, no sign of life. The next morning, he checked the driveway for footprints. There were none. The gravel looked undisturbed. The footsteps returned that night. Same slow pace, same deliberate rhythm, stopping beneath his window again. Henry's unease grew. He set up a small recorder by the window, hoping to catch the sound, or maybe prove to himself it was nothing. The recording captured the footsteps, loud and clear, but when he played it back, the sound seemed unnatural, too steady, too perfectly timed, like a metronome marking out a beat. Nights passed. The footsteps didn't change, but sometimes Henry noticed something else, a faint tapping sound, like nails rapping against wood coming from the side of the house. One evening, as he lay in bed, the tapping grew louder, shifting closer. Then the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't stop beneath his window. Instead, they began to climb the side of the house. Henry's breath caught as he listened to the gravel crunching, moving upward along the siding, over the porch railing, up toward the roof. He flung open the window, the cold night air rushing in, but the driveway and yard were empty. The footsteps continued, now higher, scraping along the rooftop shingles before finally fading into silence. The next day, Henry inspected the roof. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints, no broken shingles, no signs of any intruder, but the feeling of being watched clung to him like a shadow. He began sleeping with the curtains tightly closed, windows locked, and a baseball bat by his bed. Yet the footsteps continued their nightly ritual, relentless and precise. One night, Henry's nerves snapped. He stayed awake until the sounds began. When he heard the footsteps approaching his window, he flung the curtains open, ready to confront whoever or whatever was outside. There was nothing, no person, no animal, no sign of disturbance, just the moonlight casting shadows on the gravel. But then the footsteps resumed, only now they were coming from inside the house, from the hallway. His heart thundered. He grabbed the bat and crept toward the door. The footsteps moved slowly down the hall, then paused outside his bedroom door. Henry held his breath. The doorknob rattled violently, then stopped suddenly. Then the footsteps retreated in what sounded like a run, back down the hallway toward the living room and finally through the front door. Henry opened the bedroom door and walked to the living room, bat in hand. The door was still shut and locked, but he knew what he had witnessed. It's been 8 months of peace, but Henry still feels something is off. Since that night, sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he swears he can hear the crunch of gravel outside his bedroom window, footsteps climbing the wall, inching closer and closer, then fading into the cold night air.